Hi everyone. So in the past videos I have talked about what are atoms, how small these atoms are and how do we weigh these atoms. In this video I'm going to talk about how do atoms exist. So we know how clearly atoms are unimaginably small. But the macroscopic world that you see around you is something that you can see, feel and touch, which clearly means that atoms are not present just like that, but in clustered forms. So, whenever there is an atom, it can form a cluster or a reiteration of many atoms together, and then what we get is called an element. As you know, there are a total of 118 elements in periodic table. Now, it's also possible that atoms combine with same or different atoms to form molecules because most atoms do not exist independently. So, for example, one atom of oxygen can combine with two atoms of hydrogen to form a molecule of water. Now, when a molecule is clustered to a very high extent, what we get is called a compound. So, to clearly differentiate between what is an atom and what is a molecule, well, atoms are the reiterating or a smallest species of any element, whereas a molecule is a reiterating or a smallest species of a compound. Now, the number of atoms constituting a molecule is called its atomicity. For example, on the screen you can see various numbers of different molecules. The first one is carbon dioxide, second one is water, then we have ammonia, then we have oxygen gas, then we have argon gas, and finally we have hydrogen gas. So as you can see, all of these are different molecules. In the first case, in case of carbon dioxide, we have three different atoms together. We have two atoms of oxygen and one atom of carbon combining together, and that is why its atomicity is 3 and it is called triatomic. Similarly, water has the atomicity of 3 again and it is again triatomic. Ammonia, on the other hand, has 4 different atoms combining together, and that is why the atomicity here is 4 and it is tetraatomic. Oxygen gas again has two atoms combining, and that is why it is diatomic. Argon gas is only made up of a single atom, and there is no formation of molecule here, and that is why it is monoatomic, having the atomicity of 1. Hydrogen gas has the atomicity of 2 because it has two atoms combining together. So, other than forming molecules, atoms can also form charged species which are called ions. As we know, charges are of two types, positive and negative. Positively charged ions are called cations, whereas negatively charged ions are called anions. We all know how we have a periodic table, and it is divided into three parts or three different type of elements, which is metals, nonmetals and metalloids. The red color ones are the metals and the blue color ones are the nonmetals. Also, it is important to understand that metals always form positively charged ions or cations, and nonmetals always form negatively charged ions or anions. For example, sodium metal forms a positively charged with a charge of plus 1, and that is called a sodium cation. Similarly, chlorine forms a negatively charged ion which is called a chloride anion. Something which is important here to understand is that always metals and their charges are going to have an IUM or EM in the end. For example, sodium has IUM in the end. Magnesium also has IUM. Beryllium, calcium, all the metals or positively charged species or species which have tendency to form positive charges are always going to have IUM in the end. Whereas nonmetals in their negative state will have an IDE or ATE in the end. For example, chloride has IDE, fluoride, bromide, iodide, all these elements when they form a negatively charged species have an IDE or in some cases ATE at the end. When these two oppositely charged species combine together, we get a molecule, and this kind of a molecule, since it is made up of two different kind of charges together, is called an ionic compound because it is made up of two kinds of charges, positive and negative charges. So cations and anions combine to form ionic compounds, and here we have various examples of different ionic compounds: sodium chloride, calcium oxide, magnesium chloride. So we can clearly understand that sodium, calcium and magnesium are the metals here because they have an IUM and they must be having a positive charge, whereas chlorine, oxygen, and again chlorine do have a negative charge, and that is why they are non-metals. Now let's talk about this 2 which is hanging out here in MgCl2. Well, this 2 is because of the charges. There is a table in NCERT which you absolutely have to remember, and remember the charges that every metal or non-metal has. It's clear to understand how non-metals are always going to have a negative charge, metals are always going to have a positive charge, but what amount of positive and negative charge they have, that is something which you have to remember. Now, in case of, let's say, magnesium and chloride, magnesium has a positive charge of +2, whereas chloride have a positive charge of -1. So how do we make a chemical formula out of magnesium and chloride? Well, what we'll do is we'll just list the symbols and the charges. So magnesium has a charge of +2 and chlorine has a charge of -1. Now what we're going to do is just cross multiply these numbers together in a sort of way, and we have to just remove the sign. Positive and negative sign has to just go away, and then we get an MgCl2, and this is the chemical formula of magnesium chloride. Similarly, we have different examples. In case of aluminium oxide, the charge on aluminium is +3, whereas that of oxygen is -2. After cross multiplication and removal of charges, we get Al2O3, which is the molecular formula or the chemical formula for aluminium oxide. Again, we have H2S, and similarly we have charges and the cross multiplications which lead to the chemical formula of these. We have example of NaNO3, example of calcium hydroxide, and we have various other examples in NCERT which we can practice. But first and foremost thing is to remember the table which I just showed in one of the slides. Well, in this video, what we have discussed is how to write chemical formulas and how are atoms and molecules different from each other. Now you all can head off to EduRev, practice the test and read the notes, and thank you so much for watching.